The rain against the window of the clinic did not sound like water. It sounded like fingers tapping, thousands of skeletal fingertips testing the strength of the glass. Dr. Elias Thorne stood with his back to the dental chair, staring out at the gray, weeping skyline of London. The clinic was on the 4th floor, isolated, sterile, and quiet. So quiet that the hum of the autoclave in the sterilization room felt like a drill boring directly into the base of his skull. Elias was a man of precision. He lived his life in millimeters, in the microscopic difference between a clean margin and an exposed nerve. But lately, the margins had blurred. Lately, the rot wasn't just in the teeth, it was in the air. It started 3 months ago with Mr. Henderson. Henderson was a kind man, elderly, with a bridge that needed adjusting. The appointment had been routine, mundane. But as Henderson left, he turned at the door and smiled. It wasn't a polite smile, it was a rictus, a stretching of lips that exposed too much gum, too much bone. It was a smile of absolute, terrifying finality. 2 days later, Henderson was found dead in his armchair, eyes wide open, staring at a wall that wasn't there. Then came Mrs. Galloway, then the young boy, Timmy. They all did it. Just before they left the operatory, they would pause, the light from the hallway catching their eyes, and they would smile, that same impossible smile, a smile that said, "I know something you don't." And within the week, they would be dead. Accidents, aneurysms, falls. The causes were natural, but the pattern was not. Elias rubbed his eyes, feeling the grit of insomnia under his eyelids. He hadn't slept properly in weeks. The clinic, once his sanctuary of white enamel and stainless steel, now felt like a mausoleum. The smell of antiseptic, usually crisp and clean, now smelled like formaldehyde. He checked his watch. 4 p.m. The last appointment of the day. A new patient. The file on the counter was thin, almost empty. Clara Vance. No dental history, no insurance details, just a name and a cash payment made in advance. He heard the bell above the reception door chime. It wasn't a cheerful sound. It was a dull thud, like a stone dropped into a deep well. Elias straightened his white coat, took a breath that rattled in his chest, and walked into the reception area. The waiting room was empty, save for the woman sitting in the far corner. She was soaking wet, yet there was no puddle beneath her. She wore a heavy wool coat that seemed to swallow the light around her. Her skin was the color of old parchment, pale and translucent enough that Elias fancied he could see the blue veins pulsing frantically beneath her temple. She didn't look up when he entered. She was staring at the aquarium, watching the goldfish cycle endlessly in their glass prison. "Miss Vance?" Elias asked. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, brittle and dry. The woman stood up slowly. Her movements were fluid, too smooth, lacking the natural, jerky micro-adjustments of human motion. She turned to him. Her eyes were dark, the pupils blown wide so that the iris was barely visible. "Dr. Thorne," she said. Her voice was soft, like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "I have been waiting for this." Elias felt a cold prickle of sweat on the back of his neck. "Please, come through." He led her into the operatory. She sat in the chair without being asked, her head sinking back into the leather headrest. She didn't remove her coat. Elias washed his hands, the ritual usually calming him, but today the water felt slimy, thick. He snapped on his latex gloves, the snap echoing like a gunshot in the small room. He pulled the mask over his face, hiding his own anxiety. "What seems to be the trouble today, Miss Vance?" he asked, adjusting the overhead light. The beam hit her face, washing her out, making her look like a marble statue. She didn't answer immediately. She just stared up at the light, her eyes unblinking. "There is something inside," she whispered. "Something that needs to be seen." Elias frowned. "A cavity? Pain in the molars?" She shook her head, a slow rolling motion. "Deeper." Elias picked up the dental mirror and the Explorer probe. His hand trembled slightly. He willed it to stop. He was a professional. He was a man of science. He leaned over her. "Open, please." Clara Vance opened her mouth. The breath that escaped her was cold. It didn't smell of decay or food. It smelled of wet earth, of damp basements and old, stagnant water. Elias leaned in, focusing on the teeth. They were perfect, pristine. Not a speck of plaque, not a shadow of a cavity. The enamels shone with a pearlescent luster that seemed almost artificial. "Your teeth look perfect, Miss Vance," Elias muttered, moving the mirror to check the lingual surfaces. "I don't see any—" And then she smiled. It happened under his hands. Her lips retracted, pulling back unnaturally far, the skin at the corners of her mouth stretching to the tearing point. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a presentation. She was displaying herself. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. The hum of the sterilization machine stopped abruptly, plunging the room into a heavy, suffocating silence. Elias tried to pull his hands away, but he was frozen, paralyzed by a sudden primal instinct that told him, "Do not move, do not breathe." "Look," she gurgled, the sound wet and distorted. Elias looked. He didn't want to, but his eyes were locked onto the cavity of her mouth. The tongue was not normal. It was gray, the texture of dead muscle, sluggish and heavy. But it was what was on the tongue that made the bile rise in Elias's throat. Carved into the flesh of the tongue, deep enough that the edges of the wounds were white and fibrous, were letters. It wasn't fresh. There was no blood. The wounds had healed over, forming thick, raised, keloid scars against the gray tissue. He squinted, his mind refusing to process the data. He leaned closer, the horror overriding his survival instinct. The letters were jagged, scratched as if by a nail or a broken tooth. They spelled a name: E-L-I-A-S. He stumbled back, dropping the mirror. It clattered onto the linoleum floor, the sound shattering the trance. Who are you?" Elias gasped, backing until his legs hit the counter. He knocked over a tray of instruments, scalers and forceps crashing down in a cacophony of metal. Clara Vance did not move. She remained in the chair, that impossible wide smile plastered on her face, her tongue lolling out like a dead slug, displaying his name to the ceiling. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The message was intimate, violent. "How did you do that?" Elias screamed, his professional mask disintegrating. "Who sent you?" The woman slowly closed her mouth. The smile faded, replaced by a look of profound, crushing sadness. She sat up, the movement stiff and mechanical. "The diagnosis is complete, doctor," she said. Her voice was different now, deeper, vibrating in the floorboards. "The root is rotten. It has to be pulled." She stood up and walked toward him. Elias scrambled sideways, grabbing a scalpel from the counter, holding it out with a shaking hand. "Stay back. I'll call the police." Clara stopped. She looked at the scalpel with mild curiosity, then looked at Elias's eyes. "You can't cut out what is already part of you," she whispered. She turned and walked out of the operatory. Elias stood there, chest heaving, the scalpel shaking in his grip. He heard the front door chime. She was gone. He waited for a minute, 2, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Then, rage overtook the fear. He ran to the waiting room. Empty. He ran to the stairwell, throwing the door open. The stairs were empty. No sound of footsteps. No wet footprints. It was as if she had evaporated. Elias ran back into the clinic and locked the door. He bolted it. He chained it. He backed away, his breathing ragged. He went to the sink and splashed cold water on his face, scrubbing hard, trying to wash away the image of that gray, scarred tongue. Elias. Why his name? Why her? He went back to the operatory to clean up the mess. He bent down to pick up the dental mirror he had dropped. As his fingers closed around the handle, he froze. The mirror was face up. In the small, round glass, he saw a reflection, not of the ceiling, not of the dental light. In the reflection of the small mirror on the floor, he saw a face peering out from under the dental chair. It was Henderson, Mr. Henderson, the dead man. His skin was blue, his eyes clouded with cataracts, and he was smiling. Elias screamed and kicked the chair away. There was nothing there, just the empty linoleum. He was losing his mind, that was it. The stress, the chemicals, the isolation. He needed a drink. He needed to get out. He grabbed his coat and keys, leaving the lights on, leaving the mess. He ran out of the clinic, down the 4 flights of stairs, and burst onto the street. The rain had stopped, replaced by a thick yellow fog that clung to the cobblestones. The street lights flickered, buzzing like dying insects. Elias walked fast, heading toward the tube station. He needed people, he needed noise, but the streets were strangely empty. A black cab idled at the corner, but the driver's seat was empty. A newsstand was open, papers fluttering in the wind, but the vendor was gone. Elias walked faster, his footsteps echoing too loudly, the sound delaying by a fraction of a second, as if the world was lagging behind him. He passed a shop window, a bakery. He glanced inside. There were people there, a relief so sharp it almost brought him to his knees. He pressed his face to the glass. A family, a mother, a father, a child. They were standing around a table, but they weren't moving. They were frozen in place. And they were all looking at the door, looking at him, and they were all smiling, that same wide, gum-exposing smile. The father's jaw was unhinged, hanging loosely. The mother's lips were split at the corners. The child was holding a drawing up to the window. Elias squinted. The drawing was of a tooth, a giant, black, rotting tooth. And inside the tooth, a man was trapped. Elias backed away from the window, stumbling into the street. "Help!" he croaked. "Somebody!" No answer. The city was dead. Or maybe he was. He turned a corner and froze. He was back in front of his building, the dental clinic. He had walked in a straight line for 20 minutes, yet here he was. The lights on the 4th floor were blazing, and in the window he saw a silhouette, a man in a white coat. Standing with his back to the window, Elias felt a wave of vertigo. That was his office. That was him. He wasn't down here on the street. He was up there. This was the delusion. He had to wake up. He rushed into the building, ignoring the elevator, sprinting up the stairs. His lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he pushed on. 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor. The air grew colder with every step. The smell of formaldehyde grew stronger, choking him. 4th floor. The door to his clinic was standing open. The lock he had bolted was intact, but the door was open anyway, the wood splintered around the frame. He walked in. The silence was absolute. No hum of the fridge, no buzz of the lights, just a heavy, dead pressure. He walked into the operatory. The chair was empty. The mess he had made was gone. The instruments were neatly arranged on the tray. The mirror was in its place, and sitting in the dental chair was not Clara Vance. It was him. A second Elias Thorne sat in the chair, wearing the patient bib, his hands folded neatly in his lap. The seated Elias looked at the standing Elias. The seated Elias was pale, his eyes wide and dark, his skin the texture of old parchment. "You're late," the seated Elias said. His voice was the sound of the drill, high-pitched and mechanical. The standing Elias shook his head. "No, I am real. You are the hallucination." He grabbed a scaler from the tray, brandishing it like a weapon. "Get out of my head." The seated Elias didn't flinch. He just opened his mouth. Check the margins, doctor. Elias felt an invisible force pulling him forward. He didn't want to move, but his body betrayed him. He stepped closer to his doppelganger. He raised the light. He looked into the mouth of the thing that looked like him. The teeth were not teeth. They were tiny tombstones. Rows of miniature white marble slabs, each one engraved with a name. Henderson, Galloway, Timmy. And in the center, where the tongue should be, there was a hole, a black, endless pit. A wind blew from the throat of the seated figure, smelling of wet earth and time. "You missed the diagnosis," the seated figure whispered, the voice echoing from the pit. "It wasn't them who were dying, Elias. They were cured. You are the disease. You are the cavity in the world." The standing Elias felt a sharp pain in his own jaw, a pressure building behind his eyes. He dropped the scaler. He raised his hands to his face. His mouth felt strange, numb. He ran his tongue over his teeth. They felt soft, mushy, like wet chalk. He panicked, grabbing the mirror, turning it toward himself. He looked at his reflection. His skin was graying, rotting before his eyes. His eyes were sinking into his skull, and his mouth, his lips were retracting, pulling back, wider, wider, snapping the tendons. He tried to scream, but he couldn't close his mouth. He was smiling. The smile of the dead. He looked closer at his own reflection. His teeth were falling out, crumbling into dust, spilling out of his mouth like sand. And as the teeth fell away, he saw what was underneath. His gums were receding, revealing the bone. And carved into his own jawbone was a message. It wasn't a name this time, it was a date. Today. The seated Elias stood up. He was tall, looming over the broken dentist. He reached out a hand, his fingers long and cold. "Open wide," he commanded. Elias couldn't look away. He couldn't close his mouth. He could only stare into the void of the other's throat as the darkness expanded, swallowing the room, swallowing the light, swallowing the reality of the London skyline. The last thing Dr. Elias Thorne felt was the sensation of cold steel against his soul and the realization that the drill had finally hit the nerve. The waiting room was full now. He could hear them behind the wall. Henderson, Mrs. Galloway, Timmy, Clara. They were all applauding, a slow, wet, clapping sound. Elias tried to beg, but his tongue was gone. In its place, a new name was being written, carved by the invisible hand of the dark, ensuring that the next doctor, the next victim, would know exactly who was waiting for them in the dark. The smile was fixed. It would never fade. It was the only thing left of him that was real.